Okay, in this video tutorial, we're going to introduce Mudbox. And so Mudbox is an Autodesk program. It's my sister program, and it's meant to emulate ZBrush. And ZBrush and Mudbox are both programs where you can sculpt your models with a good level of detail, and it behaves a little bit more like clay than normal modeling. And the way it does that is it creates, you can create models that are up to over 1 million polygons. And so it's just a deeper polygon count. And that's the way that we're able to get that much detail. And just as a broad rule of thumb, there's kind of two ways to think about using these programs in my mind when it comes to sculpting. You can either use it to do the basic sculpting of a model and later bring it into Maya and retopologize using the quad draw tool. And so you can use it almost to like sketch out and kind of rough out the shape of your character. So that's one way you can use it. Another way you can use it is, let's say your character is already done for the most part and they're UV'd and you want to just sculpt some detail onto the character. And that's another way to use it. So you can use it more as like a detail sculpting. And what we're going to focus on today is just introducing the program and kind of using it that first way, where we're just kind of sculpting, basic ideas and then the ideas we would hypothetically retopologize down the road. So this is what the program looks like when you first open it. You can see some kind of learning tips right here. And you'll also see that there's some base models that you can hypothetically start with over on this side. And I'm just going to close that. And what I want to show you first is how we can kind of use the two programs together. So over in Maya, I created just the most basic model on the planet, right? So I just created a cube and created a couple extrusions, and just by extrude, pulling out stuff like that. And I'm just giving myself a base model just to demonstrate the software with. And so hypothetically, you would probably want to build your model out with more detail than this. And so what I have here is, so I have the object as an object mode, and I can send it to Mudbox in two different ways. And so the easiest way is just go to File and then Send to Mudbox and send as a new scene. So that's my recommendation right there. If for whatever reason that doesn't work, what you can do is you can go File, Export Selection, and then export your model as an OBJ and export that selection, and then in Mudbox we can import that OBJ. And so an OBJ is a file format in 3D that is pretty universal. It can be opened by pretty much any program, whether it's even like After Effects and stuff like that can open an OBJ. So it's a really good universal option right there. And so I've already kind of exported that before this tutorial, so I have that as an option here. So back to the easy way. So I just go to File, Send to Mudbox, Send as a new scene. And a green box should show up down there. And you'll get an error message that looks like this. Remember what I was talking about, where there's the two ways you can model in Mudbox. And for the detail sculpt, so we're just doing the basic sculpting, but if you want to do detail sculpting where you bake your details onto like a normal map, then you need UVs. I didn't UV this object because we're just kind of showing the basics. So I'm just going to click on Keep This Mesh, and there we go. And so pretty likely you'll see some red error messages right there. Sometimes that can be useful because it can kind of show you errors in your mesh. It's really not going to be a problem for me on this one. So under Display, I'm just going to go down to Mesh Errors and turn that off, and that's the way you get rid of those red dots. So the next thing you'll notice, looking at the scene, is we have the overall interface. And so we have our main window right here, and navigating this window works exactly the same way as when you're moving the camera in Maya. And if you're using a pen, like I'm doing right now, you might want to go down and map your pen settings to match a 3-button mouse, if you're able to, and that'll make navigating a little bit easier. And in sculpting, it's really important to just kind of keep your camera active. And so whatever you can do to kind of make that as easy and intuitive as possible, I highly recommend. And so one other thing is, so in Maya, if you press F, it'll frame up your model. Here, A as an apple, is the main way to kind of frame up your model. And so that works if I'm overly zoomed in and I want to kind of punch back out, or if I'm just way over here and I can't find my model, I can press A and punch back into my model there. So we have that view. We have these tools down here, and so we'll go over that in just a moment, but we have sculpting tools. We can actually paint in Mudbox as well. We're going to focus on sculpting today. And we have some simple transpose tools down here. Over in this section, we have some lighting presets and some material presets, and I'll go over that in just a moment. And over here, this is an important area. We have our layers and our object list, and you can see there's two different categories that we can work in. So we can work in painting mode, where we're painting on the object, and we can work in sculpting mode. And so what we want to do today is focus on sculpting. And let's see here, my computer just froze. So let me see if I can unfreeze it. Let's try this. I'm just going to save my scene real quick. And there we go. Normally I would work in a project folder like I would in Maya, where it's really organized, but since this is an online demo, I'm just kind of working off of my desktop today. And so here we are. So we're in the sculpting layer panel, and we also have object list down below, and this works like the outliner in Maya, where you can see like your different objects, and it's really helpful because when we start adding subdivision levels, we can actually see it down there as well. So let me just kind of click back off of that, and we're back to normal. So I'm in my layers view. And so the first thing that we want to do is step up the subdivision level. So if I press W right here, it'll give me a wireframe on my model. And remember, a big advantage of this program is we can work with, you know, hundreds of thousands of polygons very easily. And so if you go up here to mesh at the top bar, you can press Shift and D to add a new subdivision level. And you can also press page up and page down over here to step up and step down your subdivision level. On my keyboard that I'm working on right now, I actually don't have a page up, page down, so I'll just have to go to Mesh and click on those buttons. But so I have Mesh, add new subdivision, so I'll add it as now on subdivision level 1, and I'll do it again. And so you can see wireframes turn on, so I'm at 704. We're at nearly 3,000. And so we're at 11,000 right now. So this is still actually pretty low within the context of this program, but that's good enough for at least the moment. And so now we'll notice, I'll press W to get out of wireframe mode. My model's really small in my scene, and this probably happened to you as well, most likely. And so what we need to do is we need to go to Select and Move Tools, and I need to just scale this thing up. And so Select and Move Tools, I want to scale, and I'm just, that center white box, I'm just dragging from left to right to get this model to a decent size. And then I like to just use the Translate tool and move it up to get it away from the grid. And remember, I can press A to focus back in on my object. So some other cool things we can do is, so moving from this section, we can go over here to Material Presets. And so we can try different materials on our object. And this one thing that's really nice here is these are shaders that when we export this back into Maya, these are not going to come over. So this is just, these are, think of them as preview shaders. So as we're working in this program, these just kind of affect the way it looks as we're sculpting right now, but it's not going to have an effect on the final product. Similarly, we have lighting presets. So we're under the default lighting preset right now. And if we click here, so this is going to be the same idea, where if I click on that, it'll give me an error message and I'll say OK. And we can try different lighting configurations. And so this can be helpful while you're sculpting, just to kind of see your model in a different light. And again, these lights are not going to come over into Maya when we send this back. So let's move over to the sculpting tools. So over here under sculpting tools, the first thing I want to show you is Sculpt. And so you might have noticed when I click on these different tools, the properties panel might update here. Sometimes you need to double click in order to get it to show up. And so I'll double click on Sculpt. And so I can kind of keep my eye over here on this side to adjust the brush. But something that I really like to do is hold down Spacebar. And so this gives us a breakout menu where we can do a ton of different things. The main things we're going to focus on in this tutorial is just this one and this one. And so this affects the size of your brush right there. So I can decrease and increase the size of my brush just by dragging up and down. Similarly, if I hold down Spacebar, this one is the strength of the brush. And you'll see if you look over to the right that those settings correspond as I drag right there. And so you could just kind of keep coming over to the side, but whenever I can just kind of keep my eye on the prize when I'm sculpting, the better it's going to go. And so holding down Spacebar just gives you quick access to those options. So looking over here to the properties panel, you might notice we have some other options available. So I have the mirror option. So right now if I were to sculpt, it would kind of come in on one side of the model, but not the other. I'll press Edit Undo, or Command Z, Control Z. But you can see I can mirror in these different directions. And so for my character, or my model, I would mirror along X. And so now when I sculpt, it'll hit both sides. And my model's a little asymmetrical, right? But I'm just going to demo this on the front, so that's not going to be a problem. And so that's essentially the Sculpt tool right there. If I click and drag, it should look like that. And if I can also invert the function by clicking right here. And what that does is it just pushes into the model rather than pulling out of the model. And I can also do that by holding Control on my keyboard. And Control is like a temporary way to kind of get that to invert. Let's try a different lighting setup. Sure, yeah. And so let's move over to this side. So that's essentially the main sculpting tool. And you'll notice that there's some other options underneath here. And this has to do with the spacing and if you're experiencing problems with a model, or if you want to kind of fine-tune some things, we can kind of mess with these options. If your brush gets a little out of whack while you're adjusting these, just remember you can go down here to reset, and that should reset your brush back to its standard kind of configuration. So, so far the shortcuts that I've shown are W, shows the wireframe, A frames it up, holding down Spacebar lets you gives you the breakout menu to adjust the brush size. Another really important one is the smooth brush. And so the smooth, I could just click on it and go to smooth at any point right there. But let me just press Edit Undo. I can also, no matter which brush I'm using down here, I can just hold down Shift and it gives me access to the smooth brush at any point in time. So holding down Shift really helpful because the smooth brush will come up a whole lot. And so early on in your sculpting process, another brush to kind of keep your eye on is the grab brush. And this is a lot like the move brush in ZBrush, but it allows you to just click on a part of the model and kind of pull it up. So if you want to like simulate like a horn on your character, I can just click and drag that up that way, right? I can make the brush really broad, and I can use it to really start to shape my model, right? So if you're really, especially early on in the modeling process, the move tool can be a really good option to make kind of broad adjustments to your model. And it looked a little bit crazy right there just because I zoomed out a little bit too much. If the model starts to get a little bit too big, I can just go back to select a move, scale, and scale it back down. And what happened there is I believe my brush was just too big. And so it's kind of selecting them all at the same time. And so I just need to make my brush small, and that way I can kind of scale it down without my brush kind of hitting that by mistake. And so the grab tool, kind of going back to that, the grab tool really, really helpful in terms of making adjustments to your model. And let's see here. One thing that's really helpful with the grab tool is just making sure you're on a good subdivision level for it. So if I press W, that's kind of the amount of geometry that I have right there. I can also see which subdivision level I'm on. By if you have a keyboard that has page up and page down, you can very quickly page up and down the different mesh levels. But remember, it's right here, so I can step the level down, and there we go. Mesh, step down, and so I can kind of move down to one of the lower subdivision levels just by doing that. So let me move this back up. Okay, and so another way you can look at that is if we go under Object List. Remember, this is kind of like the outliner, and the name of my object is pcube, and I can rename that at any point by right-clicking and going to Rename Object, and I'll just call this Sculpt. I can see my different subdivision levels here, and so that can be helpful just to kind of see the different poly counts that you have on each subdivision level. And so right now I can see that I'm on the highest subdivision level, and so we're at 11,000. And so there's still room for me to kind of bring this back up. And if your model is yellow, by the way, I like to just kind of click on the default material just to kind of get it back to normal. And so let's add another subdivision level. So I'll just go to Mesh, and then add a new subdivision level, add onto that. And let's begin to kind of talk about how we can use some of these other brushes, right? So we've gone over the grab brush, we've got the sculpt brush, and the sculpt brush, I can kind of use it to, sculpt things in like that. Remember, using a tablet is really helpful because how hard I click on the brush greatly affects the sensitivity of the sculpt right there. And so if I press really lightly, right there, I can get really faint lines, and if I press really hard, I can get really broad lines on that. And some other brushes that are available is we have the relax tool, similar to the smooth tool. It just basically evens out the geometry in places, so that can be helpful sometimes if your geometry gets like a little crumpled in an area. Let's see here. Another one is let's see, where is it? The wax is a little bit like the standard sculpt tool, but it just behaves like a little bit differently, and so that that might be one that you can experiment with right there. Remember, if I double click, I can kind of see the settings right there, and if I want to invert it, I can hold Control, and so that way I'm digging into the model, right, rather than kind of adding to it. And let me just press it and undo, and so that's another option that you can use. Honestly, I think this. I like, in ZBrush, I like the clay tubes tool, and this behaves a little bit like it, but I think, again, the main sculpt tool is probably my favorite. And remember, under the brush, we can kind of adjust some of these settings a little bit. And so right here, I can add new points, and it just kind of affects a little bit of how your brush tool works right here. So again, this is under the properties window, and I scroll to the bottom to where it says fall off, and this is the height when I sculpt. And you see how I have it plateau a little bit, and then it's a steep curve down like that. And so you can see now when I sculpt from the side, that little area, it starts to behave that way. And so you can kind of fine tune the parameters of your sculpt tool using that option. And so let's say that this model is nearly done. Let's see if I can show you one more tool. Yeah, there's some other options. So we have like the knife tool. Let's see if we can get this to work. Last time I've used this, I had to make some adjustments to it. So yeah, if you see on the knife tool, it doesn't really work right away. And so what I need to do is let's turn off the stamp image. There we go. And so I don't know why they have stamp image turned on for that, but the knife tool lets you kind of cut into your model a little bit. And so just be sure to turn off use stamp image. And then if I invert the function, it should cut into my model. Let's switch over to this side of the model so we can demonstrate that. So you can see right there, if I want to kind of like carve some areas like that, the knife tool can be really helpful to kind of get that. I can also, if I want to make those seams a little more abrupt, I can use the pinch tool, and I'm just dragging up and down to kind of bring that together. So just to show that one more time, I have the knife tool, and I made sure to turn off stamp image, and it's really big right now. Let me just bring that down right there. And so it's a little bit broad. I could also, if I want it to be less broad, I could make the brush size a little bit smaller, make it a little bit stronger. And now it's really digging in there, right? That's too much. Let me edit and do that. Let's bring the strength down just a little bit. There we go. Sorry, the lighting's kind of making it a little bit strange. And so you have the knife tool to kind of cut into that, but then we also have the pinch tool, and I'll make the brush size a little bit larger, and I just drag alongside it, and usually, let's bring the strength up. Yeah, you can see it kind of start to kind of come together right there. So if you need like abrupt cracks, the combination of those two tools can be a good option. And so from here, let's say that, pretend for a minute that I'm done with my sculpt. I can bring this back into Maya. And let's see here. So in order to do that, I can just go File, and then I think it can be a good practice just to save this as a Mudbox scene, just so you have it as a backup, so we can just kind of jump back to this and open it up. So first I just save scene as, and delete the FBX, and I'll save this on my desktop just because this is an online demo, but if you're working in a project, you want to make sure to save this within your project directory. So I'll press save. And then, so now I'll be able to kind of open up this Mudbox scene again in the future and just have access to my lighting and my material presets, all that good stuff. But I can also send this model back to Maya. And so I can send the model back to Maya at this current subdivision level. You can see that's a really high subdivision level. But if I want to retopologize this using the quad draw tool, that's actually not too bad. Maya can kind of handle that amount of geometry. We wouldn't be able to animate with it or do anything too advanced with it. But we can send this to Maya as a new scene and be perfectly fine. So I'll just press W to kind of remove that wireframe. And so I'm just going to go File, Send to Maya, and then Send Selection as a new scene. And it says nothing is selected. Let me just cancel that. All right, in the outliner, if you get that error message, maybe in the outliner if we click on this, let's try that again. So File, Send to Maya, Send Selected as a new scene. I'm sorry. Here we go. So I'll go to level 5. Let's try this one last time. So Send to Maya, and Send Selected as a new scene. So again, I had to go into the outliner, find my object, and then find the subdivision level that I want to send it as. And let's try that one more time. So File, Send to Maya, Send Selected as a new scene. And I'm going to send the mesh at the current level. I could send it at the base level as well. So if we want to send it at 44 faces, that is an option just by clicking there. But again, I want to send this at its current subdivision level. So I'll do that. I don't want to save this. And let's zoom out a little bit. See if I can find my object. There it is. So the object might come into your scene as like this really massive thing. So remember, I can just scale that back down and press F and frame it up. And so from here in Maya, and this will kind of be the conclusion of this tutorial, but like what we would hypothetically do if we wanted to turn this into a model that we could rig later on is use the quad draw tool. And so you can look at my other tutorial on quad draw, but just to kind of get you started with that concept, it's just we select the mesh, click on this little magnet button, so that makes the object live, and then we go to quad draw. And essentially with quad draw, the idea is we can add our own topology straight onto our model, and you can see that topology that I'm adding gets just applied directly onto this model. I can smooth it, and I can bring it up to a pretty high subdivision level if I want to. And it allows me to just kind of create a professional looking model. And the quad draw tool, something else that's nice about it is if I turn off that button, and I'm just gonna, select my original model and hide it, you can see it creates a new mesh right there. And so, yeah, a really, really helpful tool. It's actually really easy to use, especially once you get the hang of it. And it's a great way that you can retopologize these kinds of organic models that you make in either ZBrush or Mudbox.